Thank you very much, Keith. That's and John, really good sort of introductions to. I'm going to sort of bring in little bits of things that you've been talking about. What I wanted to do with my talk is introduce kind of how I ended up chasing a line, chasing contour lines, kind of through history, through places, but also sort of place me for once in the picture. So I'm going to be talking about the wee hill, the other side of Dunree, and its place in the story of contouring. But I also wanted to begin with two mountains in Scotland that I think are also quite pertinent to the, well, for me, they're pertinent to the story of contour lines. But first of all, to place me, I normally, unlike most of the work next door, I'm working in as an artist in residence in places. So I'm going to a place, responding to what is there, to the history, archaeology, geology, and to the people, but also using materials from that landscape. So what you have here is high moorland in Northumberland and drawing with sheep's wool in the landscape. If you like, taking a line for a walk. For those of you who've heard of Paul Klee, the idea of that you can take a line for a walk. So that's the kind of thing that I've spent years, decades doing. So then I was, in 2013, I was artist in residence for the National Trust for Scotland on the island of Arran. And yeah, you can just see Brodick Castle tucked in there. So I was sort of based there, but traveling island-wide, researching the history, looking at particularly the geology there, because it's such a fascinating place. I was looking at people like James Hutton, who studied the unconformities, so rocks where some of the older rocks end up on top of younger rocks. I think I've got that the right way around. And older historical maps, just kind of trying to walk in the place and look at visually what is available. And so this idea began to emerge. So Arran is interesting in the Ice Age. It was mostly covered by a whole sheet, but it was just the tops, so Goat Fell and a couple of other summits that were clear of the ice. And you can actually, if you walk up there, you can see the difference between those rocks that have been scored by the presence and movement of the ice and those above that look different and are called nunatex. So I got fascinated by this, and I had a whole idea that I was going to create this model of Ice Age Arran, and so I was looking at contour maps to try and figure out, without having to walk every summit, trying to figure out which ones possibly would have been above the ice and creating models. And then there was one day I was standing on the flanks of Goat Fell, contour map in one hand, one of the historical maps with pictorial hills drawn on the other, and the thought just struck me, I don't know how we got here. I don't know how we've ended up with contour lines on maps. I went looking for the book, couldn't find the book. Started looking at the internet, not always a good idea, and came across Hutton, inventor of contour lines. And I'm thinking, oh, James Hutton, famous geologist, also invented contour lines, fantastic. And for about 2 weeks, I was going around telling people that that's what he'd done. Not. The name was Charles Hutton. They were living around the same era, but one working in Scotland, one in England. But it was Charles Hutton who was claimed to have invented contour lines, terrestrial contour lines. So we have Goat Fell on Arran. Schiehallion in Perthshire is the mountain that we are told Charles Hutton contoured. And so after my project, my residency on Arran finished, instead of heading home, I had a few days spare, drove straight over to Perthshire to climb Schiehallion. I don't know what I was expecting to see. I didn't know if I was imagining contour lines round the hill or what, round the mountain, but it was lovely walking there. And then there was this wee plaque in the car park. I'm just going to read it now. So in the summer of 1774, the Reverend Neville Maskelyne, Astronomer Royal, set up observatories on either side of Schiehallion to measure how much plumb lines would be pulled out of vertical and towards the mountain. So if you imagine your plumb lines, here's your mountain, plumb lines, and there's going to be a little bit of movement towards the gravitational pull of the mountain. This was called the attraction of mountains. I just love that as an idea. It's so poetical, and I know Maskelyne didn't mean that, but the attraction of mountains, I certainly feel it. In effect, it became the first determination of Newton's universal gravitational constant. The mountain was surveyed by Reuben Burrough of the Royal Observatory, Greenwich. The calculations were made by the mathematician Charles Hutton, during which he was the first to use land surface contour lines, now universally employed in map making. So I had my evidence there. The next kind of bit of the picture was, I live near Newcastle in England, so I'm driving back home, and Charles Hutton was born in Newcastle. So in between other art projects, I was able to sort of continue a little bit of research into who this man was and what he was doing. So this is a bust of him in the Literary and Philosophical Society, one of the oldest libraries in England, is in Newcastle. That's his bust. And they also have some of his mathematical treatises there. It's quite an interesting story in itself, because he was the son of a miner, and he would have just ended up down the mines, except he'd broken an elbow, I think, as a child, and was sent to school instead, where it turned out he excelled at maths, took over from the maths teacher teaching, and then eventually down the line was picked up by the Astronomer Royal and got the job down in London working for the Astronomer Royal. So there's the mountain again, that's Schiehallion, and the observatories were set up on, so the north side here, and the first some were on the south side. So as Keith was saying, they had bothies set up there, they had structures for the different equipment. They were living up on top of the mountain for months on end. And if you go up there now, you can still see, particularly on the north side, the low remains of the bothy walls. I've lost me flow now. Keith, your talk was so interesting. Now I'm going to divert myself, and I need to come back to So Hutton. So they were there for 2 summers, and they were taking. Keith showed again the size of the 3-foot theodolite. I think it was a 3-foot. It might have been bigger still, that they were using around. They would have that taking it around the sort of. About the mountain, and then sending pole bearers up the mountain. So yes, so here you see the ring of theodolite stations, and then a labourer would be sent, a local probably would be sent up the hill, and every time you have a wee dot, that pole position was marked down, and all that data was brought back to Hutton in London. He never walked the mountain. He never saw it. Time long before photography. So he was just working from this information. this is also a time before we have a mean sea level. So what he did was give the summit of the mountain a 0 and then work in negative figures down. His map is missing. His contour map that he created from all this information is missing. Grist to the mill, I decide to have a go at making what I think he would, making a version using his data. So one of the things he said is he made it on 4 foot by 4 foot stout paper. That's easy, get a 4 foot piece of paper. Trickier a bit is I had a go at trying to decipher these figures myself, and then was lucky enough to find a mathematician who did all the number crunching for me and then came up with positive numbers so that I could have a positive number next to each of those spot heights. And then from that, it was a case of trying to join each one. And I'm someone who's walked the mountain, I have photographs of it, maps of it. It was very, very difficult to do. I think he got very, very confused. There's some higher ground just off to the northeast of the mountain, and it's very hard to know what would be a knoll and what would be joined to the main mountain. I think he possibly destroyed the map himself. But the interesting thing in sort of recreating a process, much like I've been doing with the hill sketching next door, is it gives you thinking time, but it also gives you an idea of what the complications would have been that someone would have faced that they may not have written about or that may not have been passed along. I think as a mathematician, and without having seen the mountain, he would have drawn in straight lines between his known points of height. So that's what I did here. I used straight lines. And that gets interesting again when we come onto the Mullagharry images. So once I'd drawn the map, I was able to use it to create a model from it, again, much as next door. So this on the right-hand side, you have Hutton's data used to make a contour map. And I used the card vertically because he was very vexed that the surveyors had never done a geological survey, because he thought the weight of the different types of stone in the mountain would affect the gravitational pull. And they hadn't done that. But so he was talking about procuring holes to be bored. So I kind of wanted to honour and represent that verticality using the card vertically, compared with the one on the left, which is the modern day contour lines. But you can see that he really didn't do a bad job at all. This is the only printed drawing attributed to Hutton of Schiehallion. So you've got N is the summit, K was a cairn to the east of the summit, P the northern observatory, and S the southern observatory. But again, what I was interested in here was, well, how has he drawn the gradients? How has he drawn the sides? What was he doing there? So again, a sort of part of the thinking process for me is, okay, well, what was he doing? Let's draw that. And I came to understand in time that's a style of drawing called crosshatch. So the lines sort of crisscross each other. And it's pretty good at giving an idea of, you know, the steepness possibly of some of the summits and the position of the flanks. So then I thought, as a little experiment, I took a number of maps from Scotland where Schiehallion was present and just picked out Schiehallion. I just want to show you this one in particular. These are the descriptive lines, this time come almost straight down the hill, like you would imagine raindrops falling down. They're called vertical hashes, and actually of a very horrible style. If you see the whole map by Arrowsmith, it looks really like a surface covered in angry boils. It's deeply unpleasant to look at, but of this whole map of Scotland, it's pretty big, the only map that he's given a summit height, or what we would call the spot height, but a summit height for, is Schiehallion. So he must have had access, I think, to Hutton's work. So he says it's 2,000 feet above the valley, and this is 1807, so they began thinking about a mean sea level, perhaps. So he says 3,550 feet above the level of the sea. So, and by this time, by this turn of the century, this interest in being able to give an idea of the volume, planimetrically where a mountain is, the height of it, the gradients, is beginning to become important. They haven't really got if you can imagine sort of going through the landscape with a 3-foot theodolite, you're not going to be levelling around a hill with that. So contouring other than just a mountain was not really a practical proposition that early into the new century. But the idea was certainly beginning to be intriguing to map makers and surveyors. So you had a lot of treatises appearing in the 19th century with diagrams like this, in just trying to explain to people what contour lines are and what they do. And if you can imagine, if you're used to seeing on maps pictorial hills, and then someone's going to show you something that looks a little bit like a pool with ripples in, and to tell you that that is a mountain, it does take a lot of explaining. It's kind of, it's a very radical idea. So I'm slowly getting to Ireland, starting with the Ordnance Survey now. So from the very early 19th century, Robert Dawson was employed to teach hill sketching to cadets and civilians to work for the Ordnance Survey, to draw in the landscape, to move through the landscape. So their sketches of hills would be taken to the etching rooms, the print rooms, and used to put the hills onto maps. And then up until 1820, the style on the left was the style that was used in the field, called the vertical style, vertical hashes, vertical hills. Dawson, as early as 1802, I've got some examples next door, was toying with the horizontal style, or horizontal hills. And by 1820, that was the method he was teaching to people outside in the landscape. And occasionally he was calling them contours. And this is a time before we've got a precise definition of what a contour is. For them, it's these rings around hills describing the gradients, rings that are closer together, where something is steeper and further apart, or maybe more faintly drawn on more gently sloping land. Ireland, we're in Ireland now. Okay, so this, from 1828, a hill department was set up in Ireland, and there was lots of innovations at this point. The head of the hill department was Dawson's son, Robert Kearsley Dawson, and he brought a lot of his father's methods, but they had the advantage of they could draw directly onto 6-inch base maps. So a lot of information was already in place, including spot heights occasionally as well, which would aid them in working out how to place the hills and how to draw them. And you'll notice on this as well that those hasher, those descriptive horizontal lines are almost solid. They start looking really like contour lines. You could look at it and imagine for a moment that it's been drawn instrumentally with theodolites, but that is not the case. I'm just going to backtrack a little bit, because I want to put Inishowen on the map as well, just at this point. So Keith's talked about the baseline. We've seen some wonderful maps from John as well of the mapping of Inishowen. But to my mind, Inishowen becomes important in many of the innovations that took place in Ireland. So on this, you can just make out the baseline, but I've just on the right-hand side, I've picked out a few places, including the sight line from Sleevesnack to Goatfell. For me, that's a lovely connector of places that have been really important to me in my quest to sort out contour lines on maps. So we've got the line from Goatfell, Sleevesnack, right in the centre of Inishowen. The line to Divis plays a really important role that, again, Keith touched on. So Thomas Drummond, they wanted a way to signal between mountains that was better than the heliograph, and you can ask, or heliotrope, and you can ask John about heliographs. And Thomas Drummond came up with limelight. And the first experiment ever, and limelight went on to be used in lighthouses, in the theatre, but its first ever use was on the 9th of November, 1825, on top of Sleevesnack. So using those, that base, I think they were up there for about 3 months, waiting for a night that was clear enough to send a signal all the way to Divis. And 3 days later, word came back that it had been a success. And from then on in, they had another piece of equipment to use to make this trigonometrical survey. And again, Keith mentioned Colby, and this is an artist's interpretation. I'm not a historian, I'm not a surveyor. For me, Colby was a top-down guy. So, he comes over to Ireland and he's going straight to the mountaintops. How can we make this planimetrically accurate mapping of Ireland? So he's starting at the summit. And he also starts at the top of the page. He starts at the top of the country at Malin Head. And so all the Ordnance Survey sheet numbering for the whole of Ireland. In England, it was itty-bitty. They kept changing, they kept swapping. In Ireland, Malin Head is sheet number 1 on the 1-inch series, on the 6-inch series. It's kind of like how he reads the country. And again, from when Keith showed, how they mapped down it was actually, towards the south that was really done last. So a lot of the innovations that were happening in the north, including the contouring. What I don't understand, and what Andrews in his remarkable book does not explain, is why the contouring started here. And that, by here, I mean sheet 18. So in the top left-hand corner, that is the second edition of sheet 18, but you get to see that it includes Fort Dunree on the eastern edge of Lough Swilly, and Andrews does state that it was in the parish of Desategny. So it really was this area, not the west side of the Swilly. So just to place us here, we're here now. We've got Dunree Hill, and just behind, it's ever so wee. It's just this hill here. It's really nothing of a hill. But in Andrews, we know that the contouring was happening there. I've just included also the fair plan here, because you start through the red numbers, which are the altitudes, you start to see the triangulation lines that they used from Dunree to Calhame, and from Calhame up to Uris. from Uris across to Sleevesnacht, they start to emerge through the fair plans and onto some of the maps. So there it is. It is just, there's Bulba, and this is our wee hill here. And I just wanted this, as John mentioned, in 2021, first time I was over here, meeting with John was really, really interesting. He had so much information about the area, and just a very quick diversion into the naming of places. So the first time I climbed Mullagharry, you're sitting at the top, and it's that wonderful thing of, if you're not at the highest summit, when you look out, you start to see the gradients around you of all the other hills. It is a really, really good site to view the country, to view the land around. And so it was lovely to hear that Mullagharry is from, I'm going to mangle it, Mullagh an Ari, hill summit of the lookout. And that Sully, it means lake of the eyes. And then Tuesday, I was up Sleevesnacht. Right at the summit is a well called Well of the Eyes. And to me, it's just this idea of eyes across the landscape. And as John was saying, before we had paper maps, people had a way of mapping where they lived and knowing where they were from these sort of like viewpoints from the tops of hills, from where they placed standing stones, these kind of sight lines, building a sort of picture of a country. I just love those ideas. So this is the first edition, a detail of the first edition, with the standing stones is the summit of Mullagharry. You can see there, you could mistake it easily for flat land. We've got some spot heights going up, but they're tiny, very difficult to read. So visually, you look at that and you would imagine that you're looking at a flat place. But this is what the hill sketchers had to draw on. So they would have had something like this on their drawing boards, and would have been hill sketching when they were asked to do a trial in contouring. So, and this is what they drew. We don't know. We don't have the names of who drew who was involved in drawing this, unfortunately. But the caption that went with the detail in the book is the earliest Irish contours on 6-inch map, sheet 18, engraved 1836, published 1837, with manuscript contours. So these are the ones penned in, added in 1839. So up until now, I envisaged the hill sketchers working pretty much alone, or maybe in pairs, but once you're carrying instruments into the field, because for the lines 400 foot around the summit, drawn with a straight line, much as I imagined Hutton did, there, so this one, and then at 300, this line, and we just have a little bit of the line at 200 there. That would have been measured with instruments and probably with the chains dragged from point to point, and then, with the staffs, the position of the staffs marked. But the lines in between, so those are 100 foot, but then the lines in between, these ones here, they were drawn by eye, and they're hill sketchers. They know how to do, they have an idea how they're going to do that, because that's what they've been doing anyway. They've been drawing descriptive horizontal lines, and now they're just trying to place them where they think they should fit at 10-foot intervals between the measured lines. I just dragged out a quote from the bottom. Now the hill sketch has 3 labourers under him, 2 acting as staff holders and chainmen, and a third carried the instrument. I'm imagining that's theodolite with spirit level. from station to station, and sheltered it from the wind with a large umbrella, which I think is I can't quite see that happening. But so again, part of the thinking process for me is then, okay, what do those contours look like? And through the process of making the models next door, it's just intriguing to me that, I mean, these hill sketchers were so skilled. I'm sure they could have put some of these gentle variations, irregularities of the hill onto the sketch, but onto the contoured map. But they chose not to. I mean, contours are diagrammatic, and it feels to me that in adding that kind of smoothing out, making some circularity, they're just extrapolating information and kind of they're in the mindset to create something that is more diagrammatic. But I might be wrong. So what I've been doing next door is trying to figure out what that process looks like. So you have here the base map that I was then copying through onto paper and then working onto tracing, because I just made so many mistakes. To begin with, I thought they would stand on top of a hill and look down and map and draw what they could see, and then slowly realizing, no, you've got to be, there's almost like a sweet spot, not too high up so you can see the gradients around you, and not too close into a hill as well, because then you don't see the others around it. You know, it's like that's too far back. You can see some, you know, you've got some of the gradients of Calhain here, but I've really lost Mullagharry. So it's working out where to stand, where to move to, and knowing that they probably stood up and were travelling through the landscape as they draw, and I need to sit down out of the wind and do a bit of thinking as well. I probably would never have been employed as a hill sketcher, but it's just fascinating to start working out the processes and not putting onto my drawings anything that I couldn't actually see. You know, you're kind of trying to imagine this view from top down, but you still have to draw only what you can see. Don't try and imagine what's on the other side of a hill. So that's, you can see there that I'm sitting probably somewhere here and oh no, it must have been here, yeah, and drawing just what I could see of Calhain and Mullagharry, and then swiveling around and putting the flanks of our wheel on behind me, the series of drawings at the back of the gallery there. What I can't do is draw like Henry Still, who I've got some examples. He started life as a hill sketcher in England and then went to work in Dublin about 30 years later. And to do a drawing like this, he would have had the hill sketchers' contour plans. He would have had their hill sketches around him. He would never have come here. He would have never seen the hills for himself, and he would never have seen photographs of them. And he was just working from the materials that the hill sketchers brought to him in the drafting office in Dublin. And he was creating maps, drawings like this that would be then, all the material he was using was on the 6-inch scale, and he would be reducing it ready for the 1-inch hills edition. So we have here, Dunree, and it's just this little pimple here that's been so important to me this last however many years. So the second edition sheet, not most of them, a lot of them, particularly for Donegal, had the contours printed on, and on the east side of the Swilly, that's contoured on the printed map, but not on the west. The west side has, and the east, our side, they didn't print the contours, so this is a detail from it. And you can see again, Mullagharry flattened, lefty there is the summit. And I just must assume that that first trial, while it was deemed success, that those contour lines weren't actually good enough to make the grade to be printed, and they didn't get around to recontouring. And it looks very strange. The National Map Library of Scotland has a fantastic digital online series, and they've now got the island maps on it. And on their system, you can do sort of contiguous, so you can run from sheet 18 straight into sheet 19. And so you see here the end of 18, the beginning of 19, and the contours disappearing into Meenaward Hill there. So it's just fascinating to see that. That said, their contours were used, and again, I have John to thank for this. He alerted me to the Admiralty series for Swilly that the Ordnance Survey printed, and they did appear to use the hill sketches contour lines for this. Admittedly, not at the 10-foot intervals. I think that's more like a 25-foot interval, but I'm pretty sure it's theirs because you've got the start points in the same positions, except now the printers, the etchers, have decided to get rid of the jerky straight lines and have nice curved lines instead. But beginning with our wee hill here, the importance of contour lines just cannot be underestimated for the military, for civil purposes, if you want to put in waterworks in the city, if you want to, unfortunately, drain more land, any project putting in roads, contour lines very quickly became essential on paper maps. So I'm just going to finish now with coming back to Goatfell, swinging back round. So we have here contoured map of Goatfell. You know, for so long, for so many, you know, for a century and a half, you know, contour lines were essential. Now, in an age of sat-nav and not, you know, when I've been speaking to young children across the way in my exhibition, they're trying to explain, first of all, what a paper map is. Most of them don't come across them, they don't use them, they don't look at them. And it's fascinating now the different ways in which mapping takes place. And so I'm just going to show you Goatfell again, but this time a LiDAR image. So this is, you know, modernish technology, and it's incredible what you can do now with sort of 3 different light sources of different colors, like 3 different suns in the sky, lighting up all the sort of intricate edges and facets of Goatfell. I wonder what Henry Still would have made of this. I mean, it does look a bit hallucinatory, but it's, you know, on one hand, it's wonderful, the technology that we have now, but it also makes me a little bit sad that we're losing those paper maps so beautifully drawn. So that's it from me, folks. Thank you very much. I just want to say a few things. So Keith was really important to my, so from 2013, I just kept thinking that I will just do this Arts Council project on Schiehallion and then I'm going to stop. I'll just do this Creative Scotland project on Hutton and then I'm going to stop. And I just could never stop. There was always something more that I wanted to know. And Keith was one of my supervisors on a PhD at Queen's. that ended up in 2022 in my final piece titled Horizontal Hills. So thank you very much to Keith and to so many of you here that have been, you know, John and Rebecca and Martha, but also Sharon and Vari. You know, it's been, you know, I've had an incredible 5 weeks. It's been really, really lovely. And also John, again, for bringing this equipment that just brings to life, you know, what was happening on in the landscape. I'm going to end with just, also I have copies of this wee booklet that I made around the Schiehallion part of the project. I would love to sell them to you. Come and see me if you want one. Okay, right, I am going to finish now.